Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where quite simply, we're on a mission to help you live longer by preventing health complications before they start. Every year, there are millions of cases of brain hemorrhage, but there really doesn't have to be. And at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to ensuring that those that don't have to happen don't. In this podcast, you will learn more about brain hemorrhages, their causes, how to prevent them, and so much more. Expect honest, straightforward conversations that will give you the information you need to take back control of your own health and potentially prevent the preventable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, on today's episode, we have Rebecca Middleton, who is the founder of the Hereditary Brain Aneurysm Support Organisation, which is the UK's first patient-centred organisation committed to supporting those who've been affected by hereditary brain aneurysms. In this episode, we will understand more about their work, but most importantly, understand, is there more ways that we can prevent brain hemorrhages from potentially happening? Now, just as a warning, this could potentially be triggering for some, but we hope by providing you with as much information as possible, we can arm you with the information that you need to potentially prevent potentially preventable brain hemorrhages from happening. Now, this is the final episode of Series 1. And if you enjoyed today's episode, if you enjoyed any of the episodes thus far, then please do click like on whatever platform you're listening to this on, because this really does support the growth of the podcast, but most importantly, help us. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today on actually this final episode of Series 1 of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. And I'm really quite intrigued and excited to have this conversation, because I think when I came across you guys, I think it was quite eye-opening in many ways. And I'll probably explain a little bit more about why it's so eye-opening as we go through the episode. But obviously your work kind of offers another avenue, I suppose, to prevent brain hemorrhages, which is exactly what we are talking about. So obviously you come from HBA Support, which is Hereditary Brain Aneurysm. It's a charity that you have set up. And firstly, can you just explain a little bit around what do you do? What is hereditary brain aneurysm, and why did you set it up in the first place?
Well, I set up Hereditary Brain Aneurysm Support to answer the need that I had when I was going through my own diagnostic journey around about 10 years ago. So HBA Support stands for Hereditary Brain Aneurysm Support, or medically they are known as familial aneurysms. And that's when aneurysms cluster in families, and there is a clear pattern of aneurysms in families, as there was in mine. When I was going through my diagnostic journey 10 years ago, I went looking for information, more information about this condition, about how and why aneurysms can cluster in families. And I just couldn't find the information that I needed at the time. When I did those 3 a.m. Google searches, when I couldn't sleep and was full of worry, I wasn't able to find balanced information, only endless research that spoke about mortality figures or disability rates or pieces of research that were hidden behind paywalls. There was no balanced information out there that told me that aneurysms can be easily treated, can be monitored, and there are options for support. Also equally important is when you have been given a diagnosis, such as you have a brain aneurysm, and we believe that is a familial brain aneurysm, you want to connect. You want to connect with other people and other families like you. We as humans have a desire to connect. And there was no way for me to connect. There was no charity for me, and there was no charity or support out there for my family as well. And I knew that I wasn't alone. I knew the statistics. I knew there were others like me. There were other families like mine, but I just couldn't find a way to connect with them and to have those conversations to say, hey, what was your experience like? How did you navigate the months and the weeks ahead, as I was going to do? So with aneurysms, as we both know, comes a huge amount of fear, a huge amount of worry too. And I wanted to use my experience and to use all of my experience and my family's experience to try and break down that fear, to try and break down that worry, and create a place where people could go for balanced information and for community as well, and to ensure that nobody had to face their journey alone, as I did when I started out 10 years ago after my diagnosis.
Yeah. There's quite a number of things in that. I'm trying to like pick them up in my brain so I don't forget them. But what I'd love to do is kind of just go back. So you obviously had a family history of aneurysms, and that was your mother. Am I right in saying, and your grandmother as well?
That's right. So my diagnostic journey started 10 years ago, but actually my complete brain aneurysm journey, if you like, started sort of nearly 16 years ago with the sudden and tragic death of my mum from a brain aneurysm just a few days before her 60th birthday. I was living and working in Germany at the time. I had a fantastic job. I was doing sort of corporate PR, international media relations, having, a great time. And I was very close to my mum, and I spoke to her at least twice a day. I had spoken to her that morning and just general kind of chit chat, and we were busy planning her 60th birthday party as well with family and friends. So I think we were discussing that and discussing whether the weather would be kind to us as well. And it was at the end of a really busy, stressful, but exciting day. And I was keen to kind of tell mum all about it. And I rang her up and I just couldn't get through. And I thought, well, that's odd. She didn't mention earlier in the day that she was going out, but then didn't really think anything of it. And then it was an hour or so later that my sister rang up and said, you better get on a plane and get home quick. Mum has collapsed. She's gone to hospital and it doesn't look good. And we didn't know what it was at the start. Was it a stroke? Was it a heart attack? We just didn't know. And I hadn't even heard really of the word aneurysm, or perhaps I had heard of it, but I didn't actually know what it meant and what the actual condition was. So I had sort of, 12 hours ahead when I was just desperately trying to find a flight, get on a flight, even consider driving home. But eventually I got on the first flight the next morning. And we made it to the hospital just in time. Mum didn't last 24 hours before she died of a double brain hemorrhage. And we managed to get to the intensive care department just in time for the life machine to be turned off. So we managed to say our goodbyes. And, it was just so devastating, as you know, there was no warning, there was no signs, everything was absolutely fine, but the balloon burst, and in that moment our lives changed forever. And instead of organising a 60th birthday party, we were now organising mum's funeral. And it was just a terrible time, and just trying to figure out what our lives had changed, and all of a sudden the world had turned upside down, and we were now just trying to figure out how to move forward without her, and life carried on as life does. And eventually I moved back to sort of Germany and picked up the pieces of my life there. But life was to stop again sort of 5 years later when my uncle, my mum's brother, died very suddenly of an aortic aneurysm. And again, we had that phone call, quickly come into hospital, it's time to say your goodbyes. And again, we rushed to the intensive care department, and again, we managed to say our goodbyes before Uncle Dave died before our eyes because of an aneurysm. And it was at my uncle's funeral that my sister and my cousins were all sat around going, oh my gosh, there's that word again. There's that word again that has caused utter devastation in our family. And we were aware of another aunt who had died because of a failed aortic repair, another uncle who had, again, vascular issues in his brain as well. And it was when another beloved uncle sort of wandered over and said, oh, well, Rebecca, you do know your grandmother died of an aneurysm. And we all just froze. We all just absolutely froze, because we're like, wow, okay, so that's my grandmother and my mother and my mother's brother. So that's one family all devastated and all gone suddenly and too young because of aneurysms. And we knew then that this was more than bad luck. This was more than a coincidence. And we needed to put urgently these pieces of this jigsaw puzzle together and see what picture we were looking at. And me being me, put my hand up as I did. I was like, right, well, I'll go off and I'll see what I can find out, and I'll see what the research is, and try and speak to some people. And I did my research, you know, and I did those 3 a.m. Google searches, and I hit the kind of the paywalls of the research. And, you know, I took 1 step forward and 2 steps back, trying to kind of figure out, is there a pattern? Is it proven? And what actually is available for me as a patient within the NHS? And eventually I went along to my GP, who kind of scratched his head and didn't really know what to do with me, but did do 2 really important things. And that was to refer me to a neurosurgeon and refer me to a genetic counsellor as well. So off I went to my neurosurgeon, who questioned why I would want to know. Why would I want to know whether I too had, you know, a life-threatening condition? And I was like, well, of course I want to know. At the time, I had 1 daughter and I was hoping to extend our family. So, you know, there was many reasons why I wanted to know. And I just, you know, I want to protect my health. I want to ensure that, you know, my daughter at the time would carry on and have her mum in her life as well. So I had to, you know, actually lobby hard to say, please, can I access this screening? Please, can I have this? And eventually he agreed, and I was screened, and it was found that I had a small aneurysm. I was told in an email on a Friday evening, never great to be told that news when, you know, the hospital then shuts down half an hour, and, you know, again, a weekend of absolute hell of what does this actually mean. And then again, you go on to the website, again, you do those 3 Dr. Google searches, and again, you just find a wall of really scary statistics as well. So yeah, using all of that experience and going through such a painful and tragic journey, I just knew that things needed to change. I knew that I needed to change the narrative. And this is, again, where HBA came from as well. And my aneurysm was small, but it grew. So 40th birthday came along. I did have my 2nd child. It was, you know, a pregnancy that was very sort of medically kind of controlled, but all was well. But then just after my 40th birthday, I went along for my regular scan. And then I got a call from my neurosurgeon to say, come in, we need to have a chat. Now, you never want your neurosurgeon to say, come in and have a chat. You want that. You do want an email saying, actually, Rebecca, everything's fine, carry on, we'll see you next year. But it wasn't the case. And I was like, oh gosh, I knew. Again, it was one of those moments of, oh, life is going to change from this point on. And I went along and they explained that the aneurysm had grown, but it also changed shape. So two indications.
Can I pause you for a second? Just for the listener, if somebody is like, what exactly is an aneurysm? Just to clarify what you'll explain next. Can you just define that in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, so an aneurysm is a bulge in a blood vessel caused by a weakness in that vessel wall. And it often happens where it branches. So as the blood flows through, where there is a weakness, it often creates a balloon-like bulge, sometimes called like a cherry-like bulge. And when it bulges out, then that is a weakness, and that weakness could rupture. Now, some aneurysms just sit there, and people have them all their lives, and they create no issues, no problems, and they never change shape, and they never do anything, and life just carries on. But sometimes aneurysms can and do rupture, and as we know, that creates devastating consequences as well. And aneurysms are more prevalent than people believe. It is estimated that around about 2 million people in the UK today are living with an unruptured aneurysm. Now, the vast majority of those will be carrying on with their lives and be completely unaffected by that. But we also know that that some aneurysms do cluster in families, and there is a pattern there. And these are the families that we are trying to connect with and trying to support.
Yep. Okay. So you've obviously, you talked about this experience. You've got to this point. Your neurosurgeons called you in. If I can just pause at that point, but just ask just a question about just that point before. So you obviously had to be the one that advocated to get in front of a neurologist, a neurosurgeon. Why do you feel there was so much resistance at that point?
It's a really hard one to unpack, and it's a question and, a point that I talk to neurosurgeons about myself, or, neurointerventionalists as well, as to why is it so hard to advocate, for yourself? Why do patients really sometimes feel that? And the pattern is different up and down the country. There are some neurosurgeons and some neurocentres where it is easier to get a scan and to get screened where there is a strong family pattern or a strong family cluster, and there are others where you really do have to fight tooth and nail to get that as well. And perhaps it's because we need more research. Perhaps we need more research on the actual patient experience as well as the actual condition. And perhaps it's, it is also the attitude and the education of neurosurgeons and neurospecialists as well, because when you think of familial or hereditary cancers, do those patients perhaps have to fight as hard to get a scan or get a screen where there is a strong family history of cancer? But if my grandmother had died of breast cancer and my mother had died of breast cancer, both at very early ages. My grandmother died when she was 8 months pregnant, and she was only 34 at the time. My mother died when she was 59 as well. Would I have had to fight quite as hard to get a breast screen when I was in my late 30s? There is gaps there, there are inconsistencies there. And again, that is something through kind of research and dialogue that we are trying to unpack and change the narrative, and also enable patients to feel that, they have that piece of paper, whether it's one of our patient guides or some facts and figures from our website, that they have that piece of paper and they can go and ask for that and be more empowered to ask for that, because they have the facts and figures and the data behind them as well, and they can prove that they are informed patient as well. Of course, it should be a joint decision making. So yeah, there is more that we need to do to get there.
Yeah, and I imagine, and I suppose, and I've had a conversation with Professor Adrian Parry-Jones, who is a consultant neurologist, and we actually discussed this as well. And I wonder whether, because of the nature of the treatment, which we'll come on to in a second, I'm sure we'll discuss your treatment as well, it is really risky, I suppose. You're going into the brain, and the brain is a very it's a very vulnerable organ, and so if somebody finds out that they have an aneurysm, I suppose it's not just an immediate, okay, we'll operate. It's not maybe that straightforward. And so there is then a risk of somebody finding out that they do have an aneurysm, and they are not encouraged to have an operation, and therefore they're living with this aneurysm, and therefore that creates anxieties, stress. Does that contribute then to the aneurysm bursting? Because we know how the effects that stress has on our body. So there is this difficult balance, I suppose, between finding out, is it the right thing to find out? And because you might not necessarily be able to operate on it, and therefore have something, have a coil in or whatnot. And we'll talk about what you've had done as well, as I mentioned. Because obviously there's risks of the operation, something might go wrong as well. So I suppose it's because it's not so straightforward in the sense of, having that diagnosis and then going into treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of variables here, and there is no clear path, and no one patient will have the same journey as another patient. But aneurysms are very treatable through tried and tested methods, whether that's coils or stents or flow diverters or other devices that are now on the market as well.
Can you explain a bit more about each one? Can you explain a little bit more about each one of those? Like what does that mean? What does that involve? What does that treatment involve?
So I had 3 coils and a stent, and that was an operation that was an endovascular operation and actually was through my groin. So they went through my groin and followed sort of my arteries all the way up my body, through my heart and into my brain. And through a catheter, they inserted 3 coils and then inserted a stent into my brain. And that, if you like, made a clot around the brain aneurysm, so plugged it so it couldn't rupture because it was just a nice big safe clot there. But there is a risk. And that is why for 4 years, my aneurysm was not treated straight away because it was felt that it was too small and the risks actually to leave it alone, that was the safest option for me, because there is a 5% risk with an operation that things could go wrong and that could result in a stroke or indeed could result in death. So, but when that aneurysm grew, or when it's at a particular size, or depending on where it is in the brain, and also depending on who you are in terms of, do you have any other comorbidities? Do you have any other health issues? What is your family history? You know, that it all depends on the individual. And this is why it should absolutely be a joint decision between the patient and the specialist to go, what is the right decision for this individual at this time? Because I then had 4 years of regular monitoring and regular brain scans, and then the pendulum swung the other way because it was becoming unstable, that actually the risks and the benefits switched. And it was felt that the safest option for me was to get it treated. And, you know, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I was scared. I was really, really scared. And I remember being sort of wheeled in to the, almost like the departure lounge of the operating theatre. And a very, very kind nurse came up to me, and as I was kind of sobbing away, and said, well, Rebecca, just remember, they do this every day. This is their bread and butter. You know, this is exceptional for you, and this will hopefully be the only time you are ever here, but this is done every single day here. And that really kind of reassured me. It was exactly what I wanted to hear at that time. But again, there is so much fear around this condition that almost people, you know, they can't see beyond the fear. And especially when it happens, as it has happened in my family, that it has clustered in my family, there is a pattern in my family. For me, you know, when I was told I had an aneurysm, my brain went, oh, well, I'm going to die then. Because my grandmother had died, my mother had died, my uncle had died, other members of my family had died because of aneurysm. So that obviously meant that I was going to die. Those members of the family didn't have an opportunity. They didn't have the opportunity to get screened, and they didn't have an opportunity to prevent that rupture. So it was really important for me, for my family, and particularly for my 2 daughters, to change that narrative. And by going through treatment, I changed the narrative of our family. I survived. Aneurysms now don't mean death. It means that mummy goes into hospital for 2 days and then has to rest for a couple of weeks, but then she's back at work and life carries on. And then I have the regular scans as I did before, and I do now, to make sure that everything is as it should be with the stent and the coils, but also to check for, if you like, other new friends as well, because I have the familial condition. There is a risk that I could have others going forward in my lifetime too, especially as I'm a woman heading towards the menopause as well. And we know that risks are greater in females. We know that with a familial condition, it often goes through female lines more than male lines. It's more common in maternal lines. And we know that those risks go up again when we are postmenopausal as well. So all of this means then that I get regular scans just to check that everything is how it should be, and that I have no as I say, no other little friends developing that we need to keep an eye on.
A huge thank you to Hugh James Solicitors for sponsoring this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, having your life torn apart by a brain hemorrhage is one thing, but learning that it could have been prevented and it was due to a mistake in your medical treatment is truly devastating. And whilst nothing can change what has happened, Hugh James's clinical negligence team can support those who have suffered a brain injury or bereavement due to a mistake in their treatment. To find out more about how and if they can support you, head to our show notes now. Yeah, I think what's interesting with what you're saying is very much aligns with what we have spoken about quite a lot through our work and particularly through this podcast, which is this word of hope. Because I think previously to your point, brain hemorrhage, the words aneurysm, would have kind of suggested that there's no hope. Everyone feels very helpless. Like, well, that's it. And because there's very little ways to prevent an aneurysm bleeding, or we would have thought, or if there has been a bleed on the brain, well, kind of like, what do we do? It's kind of a little bit helpless, And I think what's interesting here is this idea that well, actually, no, there are options. There are more options, and whilst the idea of brain surgery sounds incredibly frightening, as you yourself experienced, there is hope, and there are people that are doing this day in, day out, and there are options. And I think that's what's important, is recognizing that there are options, as well. But I think that we all would approach this and feel about this very differently. If you know somebody in your family who's had an aneurysm, burst aneurysm, potentially died from it, they might have this sense of, I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and hope that I don't, because I don't want to find out and I don't want to go through brain surgery. In your family, that's probably a really interesting group to look at, because you've all gone, you said you sat down at your uncle's funeral and, you all thought, well, this word keeps popping up, and your cousins were there, your siblings were there. How did everyone else react? Were they very similar to yourself? Because I think, that we'll all across the nation, react very, very differently. But what about within your family?
Absolutely. And what we say at HBA, and as my experience, my family experience shows, is screening is personal. It's a personal choice. And just like any screening is, whether you turn up for your cervical screens, smear test, whether you turn up for your prostate test, your appetite to how you manage your health is your choice. You choose what steps you take for your health, and whether that's facing it head on, or whether you'd sooner not know, and that is why genetic counsellors are so critical here as well, because they are the trained professionals within the NHS who can really help people explore what is happening in their families, whether there is that family pattern, but also explore whether screening is for them. And we have lots of guides on our website and webinars on our website, but genetic counsellors are key here in helping patients really explore what is right for them. And as you say, some people want to kind of just turn away and not find out, and others, like myself, want to be more proactive. And absolutely, within my family, we had the whole mix. So my sister got screened, my cousins got screened. There were aunts who said, you know what, no, it's not for me. I'm happy not to know. I'm happy with my life. If it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and I'll carry on. There were members of my family who were really sort of engaged and wanted to know what was happening to me, and wanted to know all the research that I'd found out. And there were also members of my family who were just not interested and not engaged at all. And you know what? That is absolutely fine. It is absolutely fine. Everybody has to do themselves. You do you. Do what is right for you, and what is right for your immediate family as well. But I knew I had to take proactive steps to protect myself, and ultimately to protect my children, because I wanted my children to have their mother for a long time, as well. So yeah, I face the fear, but there is one thing saying, wow, knowledge is power. Of course I'm going to find out. I'm going to find out everything. But then when you are hit with that diagnosis, when you read that email on a cold October Friday evening at 5:30, 6 o'clock, it's very different. It's very different because their knowledge is not powerful. Knowledge is very scary. And knowledge then has to be dealt with, and you have to face it. And again, because of the fear narrative around aneurysms, and because of the fear narrative, or perhaps the lack of awareness about how they are treated and how they can be monitored and how patients can be supported through the journey, then your brain immediately goes down a very dark track. And you are absolutely right. You know, our charity is all about providing the light in the darkness. And last September, which was Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month, our campaign was all about hope on the horizon, because there is hope on the horizon, whether that's through new treatment options, whether that's through having charities like ourselves, providing that balance, providing that information, providing that community and support, or through the really exciting research that is happening right now to find out more about brain aneurysms and to find out more about why some cluster in family and why some aneurysms don't cluster in family, and to find out all that we can about the natural history of the disease. That is really, really important. And that is really, really hopeful that, you know, in generations to come, just very much like cancer was sort of 20, 30 years ago, that, you know, say cancer and everybody is scared and everybody thinks death. Now there is a narrative of you live with cancer, you don't die from it. And the treatments have progressed and our understanding of the disease has progressed. And that's where we really want to go to with aneurysms. So our disease has been ignored for too long, it's been underrepresented for too long, and it's been unvalidated for too long. It's time to change that narrative, and it's time to give a megaphone to this silent disease, as it's often called.
Yeah. So if somebody is listening to this and they want to take proactive action and they want to think, do I have an aneurysm? Do I need to do anything about this? You know, I want to make sure, just like you say, my kids have their mum or their dad around a bit longer, or I want to be around a bit longer. You know, what would be the right next steps for them?
I think it's worth reminding everybody that most aneurysms, brain aneurysms, are sporadic. So there is no pattern in families, and the vast majority of them are one-offs. But if there is a pattern, or you are curious about something, or a cluster in your family, or there was this aunt and this cousin, also we have to remember that families are amazing, but also quite messy as well. You know, it took many decades for me to fully understand and realize that my grandmother had died of a brain aneurysm. We were told it was something else. That happened in the 1960s, you know, and people, it was a tragedy and people didn't want to talk about it. So, you know, sometimes it's quite hard to unpack actually what is happening in families and the health of families. And, you know, perhaps it was called a stroke, or perhaps it was called this, you know, and different labels and different understandings are given to what is actually happening. But if you are curious, then ask those questions. Ask those questions of family members and people who know the family and could give you the information. And then if you are curious and you want to perhaps consider screening, then go and speak to your GP. And they are the gateway. They are the gateway to getting screening, and hopefully also getting to speak to a genetic counsellor who could perhaps help you again unpack what is happening, but also consider whether screening is right for you, because it is a personal choice. It is a personal choice. And what we would say is, don't rush. Take your time. Do your reading. Come and have a look at our website, come and have a look at your website, find out all that you can about the condition, and explore what is my appetite to risk here. Could I live with being told that I have an aneurysm, but we have to watch and wait? You know, could I cope with being told I have an aneurysm, but I need it to be treated straight away? You know, how would I feel here? How would I feel there? And if that's something that you think, actually, no, I'm okay with these sort of choices, then go forward and try and have a conversation with a neurosurgeon at your local hospital, or a neurovascular specialist at your local hospital as well.
So in terms of the work that HBA do, what exactly do you do? Like, what are your main channels that you focus your work on?
So we're kind of busy on you know, many channels. Ultimately, we are here for our community. Ultimately, we are here to support, and we are here to raise awareness. And often that's raising awareness with different sort of healthcare professionals and different policy groups, but also it can be raising awareness within families as well, and within the wider society, that this actually is a genetic condition, or can be a genetic condition. And this is a condition that can cluster in families. So we put together patient guides, we have a series of webinars, we work together with partners such as the Brain Aneurysm Foundation in the US. We've recently done a webinar on aneurysms and risks of post-menopause as well. So we listen to our community and we find out what are their key questions, and how can we answer those questions as well. And we put together guides of how to talk to your family member if you have been diagnosed, how to explain the science and the genetics behind the condition. We have lots of guides out there and lots of webinars out there, depending on how people like to either read or listen to their information as well. And we're busy on our social channels as well, and we're trying to build that sense of community as well. And we hope to launch a peer-to-peer support group later in the year as well as our own podcast, educational podcast series as well, understanding that people also like to listen to their information as well. So we try to be there in whichever channel and whichever way that we can to be there for our community. And we are, one of the projects that we're working on right now is we're working on a patient guide. So it's a guide that we have had a little bit of funding for, which we're really proud of. And we're working with neurosurgeons, neurovascular nurse specialists. So we're working with NHS clinicians, we're working with genetic counsellors, and more importantly, we're working with patients to try and put together for the first time a guide that will support people, support patients, support families through their journey, through their diagnostic journey. And we're learning from everybody's experience of what did it feel like, and what did you struggle with, and what were your questions. But we also want to listen to nurses as well. What are the key questions that come up in your clinic? What would be really important for you, and what do you want to pass on to a patient who is either considering screening or just been diagnosed? So we are really excited to be working on that project and launching that later this year. And again, that's in the spirit of how we work, that we want to work in partnership as well, and we want to get this guide in every neurocentre and every clinic up and down the UK as well. But our commitment also to listening to the patient is that we're also putting together our own research as well. For the first time, again, listening to the patient experience of what it felt like to have that diagnosis, what it felt like as a family member, what it felt like as a patient as well, again, so we can learn from that. And then from that, we can build even more materials and start even more conversations about how care can change and adapt to support families and to support patients better.
Yeah, and I think that will benefit so many people. And I think it is that sense of support, that sense that almost normalizing it as well. The more the data you can collect, the more you can understand the experience. I think that would help an awful lot of people. And as you go through collecting this information and you're creating this guide, what are you finding that needs to change? What are you seeing that at the moment just isn't right? And actually, if we can have better processes here or better support here, that would fundamentally change the experience for the individual, and potentially also encourage more people to be getting screened, to have this surgery, potentially life-saving surgery as well. What do you feel at this point needs to change?
I think one of the biggest things is validation that this is a condition, a treatable condition, and a genetic condition as well, because it has been, sort of ignored, one of those things. It is hard to get it on the agenda. We recently put, in December, we put forward our response to the NHS 10-year consultation, because so far, this condition hasn't appeared in any policy of any government of any stripe. And we want to change that. We want to change how this condition is recognised, validated, and also get some personalised screening guidelines for those with the familial condition, because we know that there are differences from sort of sporadic aneurysms, those that happen very suddenly, but there is no familial pattern, to those that have those familial and hereditary patterns. So, at the moment, it's kind of, one size fits all. Well, it shouldn't be like that. We know we wouldn't treat, a cancer this way, for everybody. We would, if it's a genetic cancer or a familial cancer, it would have its own personalized pathway. And also, we look to the aortic aneurysm community as well. Again, aneurysms can appear in the brain, and the other common place for them to appear is the aorta as well. And they do have familial screening guidelines. They do have familial personalized pathways. So why is it that that happens for the aorta, which comes off my heart, but then if we go, centimeters up to my brain, we don't have anything personalized for familial aneurysms? Why is that the case? So that was one of the strong points that we made in our NHS 10-year consultation, and one of the points that we'll be making further this year as well, to try and lobby for that change, because there is consistencies. And again, another piece of research that we'll be launching later this year is we've done sort of an analysis on what those inconsistencies look like and how we can start filling those gaps. So for us, it's important to listen to our community, to hear their experiences, to hear where those gaps are, and then, how do we fill them? How do we change that? How can we work in partnership with the NHS, in partnership with the policy leaders, and in partnership with neurosurgeons, neurovascular nurses, to better the care pathways for those with all aneurysms.
So, Rebecca, one thing that also we wanted to talk about today was the RAW study. Can you just explain a little bit more about what that is exactly?
Absolutely. The RAW study stands for Risk of Aneurysm Rupture, and it's the largest study of its kind in the world. It's currently happening right now, today, in the UK, and it's monitoring 20,000 UK patients with aneurysms over the course of their lifetime. And what it hopes to do is uncover the drivers of aneurysm development and rupture. And it leverages the many advantages of the UK health system and the NHS system, especially the national healthcare records that we have. And these records are being used to follow these 20,000 patients with aneurysms and ruptured aneurysms through their lifetime over many, many decades. And this will really help deepen our understanding of why some aneurysms rupture and why some don't. And it's already 20 times larger than any previous similar study and 4 times the size of the world research combined. So it's hugely significant step forward to really further our understanding of brain aneurysms. And what we're also really excited about is, following on from the RAW study, is the lead investigator, Professor Diedrich Bulters, who is a trustee on our board, and his fantastic team based at Southampton. They are trying to get some funding for the next step of that study, called the RAW DNA study. Now, that is really exciting for us, because that will really help to unlock the genetic foundation of the disease and explore why some families have a genetic pattern and some don't, why it clusters in some families, and examine again why some aneurysms rupture and some don't, explore why it impacts women more than men. There are so many things that this study can unpack and explore, and it really aims to identify the rare and common genetic variants associated with aneurysm development and aneurysm rupture. It will be a global first project if it gets the funding, and it really will have such a significant impact on brain aneurysm patients, not only in the UK, but indeed globally. And with this, we can also look in the future perhaps at innovative cell and gene therapies and screening via blood tests rather than the costly MRI brain scans, which are the standard mode today. So it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. So is that something that it's started? You said that's ongoing now?
Yes, so we are really proud to support the RAW study, which is happening right now, and the RAW DNA study, again, which we are very, very proud to support. is currently looking for funding at the moment as well. So we are keeping everything crossed that it gets that funding and it gets off the ground just as soon as it can.
Yeah. And is that something that you're sharing on your socials and your website? So if somebody wants to hear more about, like, where that study goes, they can find out more there.
Absolutely. There's plenty more information on our website. We have a whole section on really important research that is happening. So take a look at that webpage.
A huge thank you to Colony Co-working for supporting us with this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and for providing us with this beautiful studio too. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we are a small team working remotely, but on a mission to make a big difference. But finding the balance between flexible working and working in inspiring spaces surrounded by inspiring people can be a hard balance to strike sometimes. Colony is an expanding network of co-working spaces in Manchester, a place for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, startups, and established businesses. A place where everyone comes together, where ideas pollinate and businesses flourish. And Colony is helping NKMT do just that by supporting us with this podcast, by helping us reach more people with this vital message, and ultimately helping us to prevent the preventable. To find out more about how Colony can help your business grow, head to the show notes now. We had a panel discussion not that long ago, and we sat down with different researchers, clinicians from different departments in Manchester University. And one of them said, that quite often you'll find that, different researchers will work in silos. And actually what's happened as a result of our charity is that we brought them together, and by bringing them together and them collaborating and sharing ideas, they're able to optimize their work that bit more. They're able to push it forward. And I think, to your point exactly, bringing all of those different people together is only going to move the work and the research and the treatment forward so much quicker. And I think this is where it's so important that, we do work collaboratively. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to not only improve the outcome after somebody has a brain hemorrhage, but also to prevent them from happening in the first place. Obviously, this is prevent the preventable. And I think this is why it's so interesting having come across the work that you're doing, because it does completely align with our work. You're just looking at it in a slightly different angle, but that as we work as a charity, ultimately we want to support, other work and other charities such as yourselves to kind of ensure that we can prevent brain hemorrhages from happening in whatever form, in whatever way. And so if we can support you by sharing this message even more, then, ultimately that's what we would love to do as a charity too. But, the work that you are doing, Rebecca, at HBA is so incredibly important. And ultimately, I'm so sorry that it's come from such a devastating place. Obviously, it's similar to the work that we do. But I think that it is so important that, as you said before, that this condition has a voice, that you are the megaphone to raise the profile of it and to demonstrate that it is treatable, just as you have said. And I think it takes somebody, or it takes a group of people to kind of stand up and go, no, something can be done about this. And we don't have to sit back and just take it for what it is. So I think there's an awful lot that still needs to be done, across all brain hemorrhages, and obviously brain aneurysms is the work that you do. But ultimately, we can see that there is a path now, and that hopefully, if, as I said before, somebody is listening and they feel that they want to be proactive, they can kind of come to yourselves and go to your website and find it for more of that information. So thank you for sharing all of that, because I think it is incredibly powerful. We close the podcast with three, we say quick fire, sometimes they're not so quick, but three questions that I'd love to kind of ask you now. The first one is obviously a big part of the preventable mission and podcast and a message is around being proactive in your life and preventing potentially preventable things from happening. And obviously we focus quite a lot on blood pressure, because we know that is one of the most modifiable things we can do for our health, and something that we can easily check and easily be proactive about. And it doesn't carry the risks of, brain surgery or whatnot. But if we can manage our blood pressure, hopefully we can mitigate a potential bleed happening from an aneurysm or otherwise in the brain. But obviously, to manage your blood pressure, it requires you to focus also on your lifestyle. So the first question on that note is, what is one non-negotiable for you in your routine, habits, and life that you know is supporting your health?
I would say ensure that there is a balance. When you're leading a charity, as you know, as you are, like as you rightfully say, we are so aligned on our kind of our missions and our values. But when you are leading a charity, especially when that charity has come from a place of tragedy and devastation, it is so important to ensure that you kind of keep raising your head to the sun, and keep having those moments of light and reflection, as well. So for me, it is ensuring that, you know, that there is balance, and that at the end of the day, you know, I go and spend time playing Barbie with the kids, or go to the gym, and especially this year, you know, I don't normally do New Year's resolutions, but this year I'm like, I need to focus more on kind of sleep, reading more and sleeping more on my two. You know, it is again that recharge and reflection as well. And when I say reading, it's not the academic papers that I usually take to bed, but you know, something a little bit more lighter, because it's so important as somebody who is kind of leading a charity that is so personal to me. You know, every day I'm remembering mum, every day I'm remembering my grandmother, every day I'm remembering those people who we have lost to aneurysms, and every day we are connecting with patients who have been so affected by aneurysms and lost their loved ones because of aneurysms, that it is important to remember that there is hope, that there is hope on the horizon, and through, you know, reading something fun, through getting the sleep, just ensuring that there is enough in the tank to go again, and to carry on that mission the next day as well. So balance, recharge and reflect, sleep and reading.
Yeah. I feel like our New Year's resolutions are quite similar there. So the second one, if you could get more people to understand one thing, what would it be?
That aneurysms are indeed devastating, that aneurysms are, you know, scary. There is a lot of fear around that word, but they are also treatable. And it's also a condition that can be hereditary. And it's also a condition that is worthy of more research. It is worthy of more analysis. And the patients who have this condition, their voices are worthy. Their voices are worthy to be heard. And we should be listening more to that patient community and raising awareness to ensure that those patients are fully supported through their journey. This condition has been ignored for too long. As I said, we need to give it the megaphone that it deserves. It's a condition that affects potentially millions, in this country. We know through our sort of data analysis that potentially up to 3 people a week are dying because of the familial condition. That's 3 people too many. So we stand ready to support more research, and to support that awareness raising, because that is going to be so incredibly important for the next generations to come, and to ensure that nobody is facing this condition alone.
Yeah. And it starts with awareness, ultimately, doesn't it? It starts with a voice, like as you said, and then hopefully then we can take action after that, and create change. So finally, do you have a motto for life? And if so, what is it?
I've been thinking very long and hard about this one, but there is a phrase that I heard over sort of the Christmas time that really, really resonated with me. And it's, the man who removed a mountain began by carrying small stones. And I'm sure that you feel it sometimes too, that when you are looking up to that high summit, when you really want to create significant change, sometimes it feels really, really hard. And sometimes you struggle to know, well, where do I put my energy today? Where do we begin? And it's a reminder that actually some days, you know, it's enough. It's enough to just move one small stone. Other days you get lucky and there's a truckload. But yeah, that moving, having those consistent steps, keep moving forward, and that's where change really, really happens.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Wow, well, that was the final episode of this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode or any of the episodes in this first series, please do click like on whatever platform you're listening to this on, as this really does support the growth of the podcast and ensure that we can reach more people with this vital information. Now, I hope that through this first series that you have learnt more about brain hemorrhages and, most importantly, the importance of managing your blood pressure and how this can potentially prevent preventable brain hemorrhage from happening. Our mission with this podcast and as a charity in general is to change the landscape of brain hemorrhages and stop more people being affected by this devastating condition by improving the treatment after somebody does have a brain hemorrhage, but most importantly, preventing them from happening in the first place. To find out more about our work as a charity, head to the links in our show notes. But for now, for the final time, thank you so much for listening.